But the human ambassador was firm. "You're not letting us do anything. We're choosing this. The math is simple. If we delay the swarm for 2 months, you can evacuate an extra 4 billion people. 4 billion lives. That's worth any price. But you will die," the Zentari counselor protested. "Your entire species. You will be extinct." The human ambassador smiled sadly. "Not our entire species. Most of humanity will remain on Earth and our colonies. We're only sending volunteers. But yes, those volunteers will die. We know that. They know that. They're going anyway." The call went out across human space. The Galactic Council needed volunteers for a delaying action against the swarm. This was not a rescue mission. This was not a dangerous operation with some chance of survival. This was certain death, slowly and painfully. They needed maybe 50,000 people to crew the ships and man the defensive positions. They expected to struggle to find even that many volunteers, even among humans. Over 5 million humans volunteered in the first 24 hours. The registration system crashed again. Social media was flooded with posts from people desperate to be chosen. Families argued about who should be allowed to go. An old woman named Chun, the daughter of the pilot who died on the Persistence, volunteered at age 73. When asked why, she said simply, "My father showed me what matters. Now I get to show my children and grandchildren. This is how we live. This is what we do." A young man barely out of school volunteered. His name was Jackson, grandson of the burn victim Dr. Vrill had treated decades ago. "My grandfather taught me that pain is just pain. It's temporary. But what you do with your life, that lasts forever. I want my life to matter." Entire families volunteered together. Parents and children. Brothers and sisters. Spouses holding hands as they registered. When the selection board tried to separate families, to take only one person from each, the volunteers protested. If they were going to die, they wanted to face it together. The selection process was agonizing. How do you choose who gets to sacrifice themselves? How do you tell someone they can't volunteer to save billions of lives? In the end, they took everyone who was qualified. 50,000 volunteers became 200,000. They couldn't turn away people willing to die for the galaxy. They couldn't say no to that kind of courage. The fleet assembled at the edge of Council space. 200,000 humans in every ship that could be spared. They set up defensive positions across 3 systems, creating a wall between the swarm and the rest of the galaxy. And they waited. The swarm came 3 weeks later. The sensors showed it first as a shadow, a darkness that blotted out the stars. Then the individual organisms became visible. Billions of them. Trillions maybe. More than anyone could count. The human fleet opened fire. Weapons flashed. Missiles streaked through space. The front ranks of the swarm died by the millions. But there were always more. For every organism destroyed, 10 more took its place. The battle lasted 2 months. Exactly as the mathematicians had predicted. The humans fought with everything they had. When ammunition ran out, they used their ships as weapons, ramming the swarm formations. When ships were disabled, the crews fought hand-to-hand against the organisms that boarded them. The galaxy watched. Every screen showed the battle. Billions of people across hundreds of worlds watched humans die to save them. They watched ships disappear into the swarm. They watched defensive stations get overrun. They watched humans fight until there was nothing left to fight with. And they watched humans face death without flinching. The communications channels stayed open. The galaxy heard human voices until the very end. Humans calling out coordinates. Humans encouraging each other. Humans singing songs from Earth as the swarm consumed them. Dr. Vrill, now ancient and near the end of his own life, watched from a medical ship far behind the lines. He listened to those final transmissions. He heard humans joking even as they died. He heard them expressing love for each other, for their families back home, for the galaxy they were saving. One of the last transmissions came from Commander Okafor, the woman who had volunteered to honor her dead husband. Her ship was surrounded, being torn apart by the swarm. She was broadcasting to anyone who could hear. To everyone watching, to everyone we saved, remember this. Pain is temporary. Fear is temporary. Death is temporary. But what we do for each other, what we sacrifice for each other, that's forever. That's what makes life worth living. That's what makes death worth dying. We love you all. Humanity out. Then silence. The human fleet was gone. 200,000 voices fell silent. The swarm had consumed them all. But they had bought 2 months. 2 precious months. The evacuations had saved billions. The defensive preparations were complete. And when the swarm finally reached the Council's defensive line, they were weakened, reduced in number by the human delaying action. The Council fleet destroyed them. Not easily. Not without losses. But they won. The swarm was eliminated. The galaxy was saved. Because 200,000 humans had chosen to die in agony to buy the time needed for victory. The memorials took years to build. Every world in Council space erected monuments to humanity's sacrifice. The names of all 200,000 volunteers were inscribed in stone, metal, crystal, and living wood. Every language in the galaxy learned those names. But the greatest memorial was how the galaxy changed. Other species looked at what humans had done and asked themselves hard questions. What would we be willing to endure to save strangers? What price would we pay for others' lives? The Zinthari started teaching their children about human sacrifice. The Quillith wrote histories of human courage. The Torvin composed songs about human endurance. Every species incorporated humanity's lesson into their cultures. Pain was not the enemy. It was just a sensation. Fear was not the master. It was just an emotion. What mattered was the choice made despite pain and fear. The choice to help. The choice to sacrifice. The choice to love others more than yourself. Humanity had taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all, that the capacity to suffer meant nothing compared to the willingness to suffer for others. That true strength wasn't avoiding pain, but enduring it for a purpose. That the highest achievement of any intelligent species was to choose love over comfort, meaning over survival, sacrifice over safety. Earth survived. The human colony survived. The species continued. But the galaxy never forgot those 200,000 volunteers who chose to face the swarm, who chose pain and fear and certain death because billions of strangers needed them to. The galaxy remembered. And remembering, they tried to be worthy of the sacrifice. They tried to build a civilization that honored what humanity had shown them. They tried to be brave enough, caring enough, loving enough to deserve what humans had given. And on Earth, in every human settlement, parents told their children about the fleet that went to fight the swarm. They taught them the names. They explained the choice those volunteers had made. They wanted every human child to know the truth. That humans felt pain more intensely than any species in the galaxy. And that had never been a weakness. It had always been their greatest strength. Because if you can feel pain that deeply and still choose to endure it for others, then you can change the galaxy. Pain was never enough to stop humanity. It never would be. Because humans had learned over millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of civilization, a simple truth that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Love matters more than comfort. Purpose matters more than safety. And some things are worth any pain, any sacrifice, any cost. That was humanity's gift to the stars. And the stars would remember forever. The Volunteer Corps was activated for the first time 3 months after its creation. A passenger ship carrying 5,000 people had suffered a catastrophic engine failure. The ship was drifting toward a black hole. The Galactic Council sent rescue ships, but they couldn't get close enough. The gravitational forces were too strong. Any ship that got close enough to dock would be pulled in, unless someone was willing to take that risk. Unless someone was willing to pilot a ship into lethal gravitational forces, dock with the passenger vessel, and guide it to safety, knowing they might not escape themselves, the Council called for volunteers. They needed pilots with specific training and experience. They made it clear this was probably a one-way mission. They expected maybe a dozen applications. They received over 10,000 applications in the first hour. The mission commander was a human named Patterson. He selected a team of 20 pilots and engineers. They went in shifts, each team taking a turn guiding the passenger ship a little farther from the black hole's pull. It was exhausting work. The gravitational forces put incredible stress on their bodies. Bones creaked. Muscles tore. The pressure was like being crushed slowly, but they succeeded. All 5,000 passengers were saved. 18 of the 20 human volunteers survived. 2 died when their ship's structural integrity failed, and they were crushed by the gravitational forces. The survivors were hospitalized for months. They had stress fractures throughout their bodies. Their organs were damaged. They would carry the injuries for the rest of their lives. But when reporters asked if they regretted volunteering, they all said the same thing. 5,000 people were alive. How could they regret that? The pattern repeated again and again. Dangerous situations emerged. Humans volunteered. Lives were saved. And sometimes, humans died saving them. A research station was trapped in a collapsing dimensional rift. Human volunteers went in to evacuate them, even though the dimensional instabilities caused excruciating pain to anyone inside. All the researchers were saved. 3 humans didn't make it out before the rift closed. A plague broke out on a colony world. The disease caused terrible pain, but was only contagious during its early stages. Human medical teams volunteered to treat patients during the contagious phase, knowing they would contract the disease themselves. They saved thousands of lives. 12 humans died from the plague, conscious and in pain until the end. A freighter carrying volatile cargo was damaged and leaking. If the cargo exploded, it would destroy a nearby station with 8,000 inhabitants. Human engineers volunteered to repair the leak, working in suits that barely protected them from the toxic cargo. They stopped the leak. 7 humans died from toxic exposure over the following weeks. The galaxy watched in awe and growing discomfort. Humans were dying to save other species at a rate that seemed unsustainable. Surely they would run out of volunteers. Surely self-preservation would eventually override their willingness to sacrifice. But the volunteers kept coming. For every human who died, 100 more applied to take their place. The waiting list for the volunteer corps grew to millions. Other species began to feel ashamed. Here was humanity, the youngest member of the galactic community, the species that felt pain more intensely than anyone else, doing what more advanced species were unwilling to do. The Xanthari military began recruiting volunteers for dangerous missions. The Quillith started training emergency response teams. The Torvan developed new rescue protocols. Humanity's example was spreading, but none of the other species could match humanity's numbers. None of them could accept pain the way humans did. They tried. They trained. They conditioned themselves. But when the moment came, when the pain hit, most of them stopped. Their instincts overrode their intentions. Humans had the same instincts. They felt the same pain, worse even. They just didn't stop. They couldn't explain why. It was just something humans did. You felt the pain. You acknowledged it. And then you kept going because the job wasn't done yet. Dr. Vril spent years studying this phenomenon. He wanted to understand it, to find the biological or psychological mechanism that allowed humans to function through pain that would incapacitate other species. He never found a complete answer. The best he could determine was that humans had developed a culture around endurance. Every human society, no matter how different otherwise, had stories about people who persevered through suffering. Heroes who kept going when others quit. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things despite pain, fear, or exhaustion. Humans taught their children these stories. They celebrated people who showed endurance. They built their entire civilization around the idea that pain was not a reason to stop, just an obstacle to overcome. It was the most remarkable evolutionary adaptation Vril had ever encountered. Not a physical trait, not a genetic advantage, just a shared cultural belief that had become so fundamental to humanity that they lived it without even thinking about it. The Galactic Council recognized humanity's contribution to the community. They awarded medals and commendations. They gave speeches praising human courage. They erected monuments to human sacrifice. But the greatest tribute came from the people humans had saved. The 300 survivors from Refuge 7 started a tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of their rescue, they gathered at Persistent Station. They said the names of the 5 humans who had died to save them: Rodriguez, Chun, Okonkwo, Smith, Yamada, and they said one more thing. A promise. We will remember. We will honor. We will pass on what you taught us. The tradition spread. Every person saved by human volunteers made the same promise. They would remember. They would tell their children and grandchildren. They would make sure the galaxy never forgot what humanity had shown them. That pain was not the enemy. Fear was not the master. And when something mattered, when lives were at stake, the right thing to do was to endure whatever had to be endured. Humans were teaching the galaxy how to be brave. 20 years after humanity joined the galactic community, the real test came. It arrived from the depths of space, from beyond the mapped regions. A threat the galaxy had thought was only legend. The swarm, a collective intelligence, made up of billions of individual organisms that consumed everything in their path. They had wiped out civilizations before, according to ancient records. They returned every few thousand years, and when they came, entire species went extinct. The Council's long-range sensors detected them at the edge of the galaxy. The swarm was massive, bigger than any previous appearance recorded in the archives. And they were heading toward inhabited space. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They had maybe 6 months before the swarm reached the first populated systems. After that, the swarm would sweep through Council space like a wave, consuming everything. Every species contributed to the defense. Warships were built. Weapons were manufactured. Evacuation plans were created. But everyone knew the truth. They couldn't stop the swarm. They could only slow it down and evacuate as many people as possible. The projections were grim. Even with every ship, every weapon, every defensive measure they could create in 6 months, they would lose half the populated systems. Billions of people would die, unless someone could delay the swarm, unless someone could buy more time for evacuations and for defensive preparations. Unless someone was willing to meet the swarm at the edge of Council space and fight a delaying action that had no chance of success. The Council debated for days. How could they ask anyone to undertake such a mission? It was suicide. Not quick death either. The swarm consumed its victims slowly, feeding on them while they were still alive. The pain would be extraordinary. The death would be slow and horrible. They couldn't ask anyone to volunteer for that. It was too much, but humanity asked themselves. The Human Council met on Earth and discussed the situation. They looked at the projections, the casualty estimates, the timeline. They calculated how much time a delaying force could buy. Every week of delay meant another 100 million evacuees. Every month meant better defensive preparations. The Human Council sent a message to the Galactic Council. Humanity would provide the delaying force. They would meet the swarm at the edge of Council space and hold them as long as possible. The Galactic Council was horrified. They knew what this meant. Any force that went to fight the swarm would be consumed. There would be no survivors, no rescues, no last-minute saves, just certain death. How could they accept such a sacrifice? How could they let an entire species volunteer for extinction? You will become sick within hours. You will die within 3 to 4 days. It will be extremely painful. The radiation will destroy your cells. Your organs will fail. There is no treatment, no cure, no way to survive once you receive that dose. Another pause. Longer this time. Kelvin waited, expecting the human to refuse. It was the only logical choice. Why would anyone choose certain death? "We're going in," Rodriguez said. Persistence out. Kelvin immediately contacted his superiors. They tried to call the human ship back, to order them to stop, but Rodriguez had cut communications. The Persistence was already accelerating toward Refuge 7. Dr. Vril, who had treated the human burn victims months earlier, was brought in to consult. The Council wanted to know if there was any chance the humans could survive the radiation exposure. None, Vril said bluntly. If they enter that radiation field, they are dead. Their bodies will break down at the cellular level. It will be agonizing. They will feel every moment of it. Then why are they going? Kelvin asked. Vril thought back to Jackson and Martinez, to their ability to function through terrible pain. Because they can save 300 people. And apparently, to humans, that is worth dying for. The Persistence reached Refuge 7 11 hours later. The colony's sensors detected the ship's arrival and the radiation damage it had already sustained. The shielding was failing. The crew was already being exposed. Rodriguez opened communications with the colony administrator. Persistence to Refuge 7. We have space for 300 people. Prepare to evacuate your most vulnerable. Children and injured first. You have 2 hours before we have to leave. The colony administrator, a Quillith named Sella, was stunned. Your crew. The readings show you have been exposed. You are all dying. Yes, Rodriguez confirmed. That's why we need to move fast. We don't have much time. Start loading passengers. What happened next became one of the most watched recordings in galactic history. The Persistence docked with Refuge 7, and the human crew began loading refugees. There were 5 humans on the ship. Rodriguez, her pilot Chun, her engineer Okonkwo, and 2 cargo specialists named Smith and Yamada. The security cameras captured everything. The humans moved quickly but carefully, helping the Quillith and Xanthari families aboard. They were especially gentle with the children, who were frightened and confused. They smiled at the children. They made jokes. They pretended everything was fine. But the medical scanners told a different story. The radiation was already destroying the humans' bodies. Their cellular structures were breaking down. They should have been incapacitated by pain. Yet they kept working. One of the Xanthari refugees was a doctor. She scanned Rodriguez when she thought the human wasn't looking. The readings made her feel sick. Rodriguez was dying. Her organs were failing. The pain signals were overwhelming. Yet Rodriguez was carrying a child in each arm, laughing at something the children's mother had said. 2 hours later, the Persistence undocked with exactly 300 refugees aboard. The ship accelerated away from the colony, racing to get clear of the radiation field before it intensified further. They made it with minutes to spare. The refugees were safe. But the humans were not. The radiation had done its work. The crew of the Persistence was already showing symptoms: nausea, weakness, tremors, and pain. Terrible pain as their cells died. The Galactic Council dispatched a medical ship to meet the Persistence. Dr. Vril was on board, along with the best radiation specialists in the galaxy. But when they scanned the humans, they all reached the same conclusion. There was nothing to be done. The damage was too severe. The humans had 3 days at most. Rodriguez refused to let them take the refugees off the Persistence until they reached a safe port. We promised them we would get them somewhere safe. We're keeping that promise. So, the Persistence continued toward the nearest council station with the human crew at the controls. The medical ship followed, monitoring the humans' condition and trying to make them comfortable. Comfortable. What a meaningless word. The humans were experiencing cell death throughout their entire bodies. The pain should have been unbearable. The medical ship's scanners showed pain levels that should have caused unconsciousness or death from shock. Yet the humans kept working. Rodriguez stayed at the command chair, piloting the ship. Chun plotted navigation. Okonkwo monitored the engines. Smith and Yamada cared for the refugees, making sure they had food and water and comfort. On the second day, Rodriguez collapsed at the controls. Chun took over. On the third day, Chun collapsed. Okonkwo took the chair. They just kept going, each one picking up where the other fell, refusing to stop until the refugees were safe. The Persistence reached the council station on the 4th day. The refugees were transferred to safety. Medical teams rushed aboard to help the humans. But it was too late. It had always been too late. Rodriguez died first, with Sela, the colony administrator, holding her hand. "Thank you," Sela said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for saving us." Rodriguez tried to smile. 300 people. Good number. Worth it. Then she was gone. The others followed over the next few hours. Chun, Okonkwo, Smith, Yamada. Each one conscious until the end. Each one in terrible pain. Each one maintaining that they would do it again if they had to. Dr. Vril was there for all of it. He watched these humans die by inches, feeling every moment of their cellular destruction. He watched them comfort each other and comfort the refugees who came to say goodbye. He watched them face death with grace and even humor, and he understood something that all his research had missed. The humans felt the pain more intensely than any species he knew, but they also possessed something equally intense: the ability to love, to sacrifice, to choose meaning over comfort. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They needed to discuss what had happened. 5 humans had died to save 300 Council citizens. They had done it knowing exactly what would happen to them. They had chosen agony and death over letting strangers perish. The vote to grant humanity full membership in the galactic community was unanimous. The news of the Persistence crew's sacrifice spread through the galactic community like wildfire. 300 survivors told their stories. They described how the humans had smiled through their pain, how they had stayed cheerful and kind even as their bodies failed. They showed the recordings of those final hours, of human courage in the face of certain death. The galaxy watched and learned. This strange species that felt pain so intensely had chosen to endure that pain to save strangers. Not for money, not for glory, not because they had to. They did it because they believed those 300 lives mattered more than their own comfort, more than their own survival. Humanity's application for council membership was not just approved. It was celebrated. Refuge 7 was renamed Persistence Station in honor of the human crew. Monuments were built. Songs were written in a dozen different languages. But more importantly, the galaxy began to ask questions. If humans could do this, what else were they capable of? What could this species accomplish if they were given the chance? The Galactic Council created a new program. They called it the Volunteer Corps. The idea was simple. When situations arose that required someone to endure danger, pain, or hardship to save others, humanity would be asked to provide volunteers. The council expected maybe a few hundred humans to sign up. They were shocked when the registration system crashed from too many applications. Over 2 million humans volunteered in the first week alone. Dr. Vril was assigned to screen the volunteers. He needed to make sure they understood what they were signing up for. He interviewed hundreds of humans, and he always asked them the same question. Why would you volunteer for missions that might kill you? The answers varied, but the theme was always the same. Because someone has to. Because it matters. Because I can help. Because that's what we do. One volunteer was a young woman named Kenji. She had no military training, no special skills. She worked as a teacher on Earth. When Vril asked her why she was volunteering, she smiled. I teach children, she said. Every day, I try to help them become good people. People who care about others. People who help when help is needed. How can I teach them those things if I'm not willing to live them myself? When the galaxy needs help, how can I say no? Another volunteer was an old man named Wilson. He was 70 years old, far older than most volunteers. Vril questioned whether he was physically capable of the demanding missions. Wilson laughed. Son, I've lived a good long life. I've seen my children grow up. I've helped my grandchildren. I've done everything I wanted to do. If I can use these last years to save some lives, to make some difference, then that's how I want to go out. Better than wasting away in a hospital bed. A third volunteer was a woman named Okafor, who had lost her husband to an industrial accident. When Vril expressed sympathy, she shook her head. Don't be sorry, she said. My husband died because safety equipment failed. He died in pain and afraid. I couldn't do anything to help him. But now I can help other people. I can make sure his death meant something by preventing other deaths. That's what he would want. That's what I want. The alien doctors stood around the human patient and tried to understand what they were seeing. The human had been in a terrible accident. His ship had exploded during a training exercise. He had burns covering 40% of his body. 3 of his ribs were broken. 1 of his lungs had collapsed. His left arm was fractured in 2 places, yet he was awake. Not only awake, but talking, asking questions, wanting to know if his crewmates were safe. Dr. Vril, a Zentari physician with over 50 years of experience, checked the readings again. The pain signals coming from the human's nervous system were incredible. The scanners showed activity levels that would have knocked any other species unconscious immediately. Most species would have died from the shock alone. How are you still conscious? Vril asked the human, whose name was Jackson. Jackson tried to smile, though the burns on his face made the expression painful to watch. It hurts like hell, Doc, but I've had worse. Impossible, Vril said flatly. Nothing could be worse than this. You should be in a coma. Your body should have shut down to protect itself from the pain. Yeah, well, human bodies don't really do that, Jackson said. He coughed, then winced as the broken rib shifted. We just kind of have to deal with it. Is Martinez okay? She was closest to the explosion. Vril gestured to another medical bay. She is there. Her injuries are similar to yours. She's also awake and asking about you. Jackson actually laughed, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through his chest. Of course she is. That's Martinez for you. Tough as nails. Over the next few days, Vril watched the 2 humans recover. It was the most remarkable thing he had ever witnessed in his long career. The pain readings never decreased. If anything, they got worse as the healing process began and nerves started repairing themselves. Yet both humans remained conscious, alert, and even cheerful. They joked with the nurses. They encouraged each other. They did their physical therapy exercises, even though Vril could see from the monitors that every movement caused agony. When he suggested pain medication, they accepted it but used far less than he recommended. "We need to feel it," Martinez explained when Vril asked why. "If we can't feel the pain, we don't know what we can and can't do safely. The pain tells us what's damaged. It's information." "But it must be unbearable," Vril protested. Martinez shrugged the shoulder. "It's bearable because we bear it. That's kind of how it works." Vril brought this case to the attention of the Galactic Medical Council. They needed to understand this strange species that had recently made contact with the wider galaxy. The council sent researchers who ran tests and scans and asked endless questions. The results were disturbing. Humans felt pain more intensely than any known species. Their nervous systems were incredibly sensitive. A minor injury that would barely register to a Xanthari would cause significant pain to a human. A major injury would generate pain signals so strong that the researchers initially thought their equipment was malfunctioning. "This is a severe evolutionary disadvantage," declared Dr. Tauth, the head of the research team. "These humans are crippled by their own biology. They must spend most of their lives in agony from minor ailments." But the human medical officer attached to the research team disagreed. Her name was Dr. Park, and she had volunteered to answer questions about human physiology. "You're measuring the pain, but you're not measuring our response to it," Dr. Park said calmly. "Yes, we feel pain intensely, but we also have something you don't seem to have. We have the ability to continue functioning despite that pain." "That makes no sense," Tauth argued. "Pain exists to stop activity. It is a warning to cease dangerous behavior. How can you ignore such strong warnings?" "We don't ignore them," Dr. Park explained. "We acknowledge them and then make a choice. The pain gives us information. Then we decide what to do with that information. Sometimes the right choice is to stop. Sometimes the right choice is to keep going." She pulled up medical records on her datapad. "Look at human history. We have people who have walked dozens of miles on broken legs to get help. Mothers who have lifted vehicles off their trapped children despite torn muscles. Soldiers who have continued fighting despite wounds that should have been incapacitating. Athletes who have finished competitions with serious injuries. We don't ignore the pain. We just don't let it make our decisions for us." The research team was skeptical. They decided to run practical tests. They created scenarios where human volunteers would experience increasing levels of discomfort and pain, expecting the humans to quit when the pain became too severe. The first test involved exposure to cold. The researchers slowly lowered the temperature in a chamber, expecting the human volunteer to request exit when it became painful. The volunteer, a young man named Torres, lasted until the temperature reached levels that would have killed most species. He only stopped when the researchers ended the test, fearing for his safety. "Weren't you in pain?" they asked him. "Yeah, it was pretty bad," Torres admitted, shivering. "But you said you needed the data, so I figured I could handle it a bit longer." The second test involved physical exertion. They had volunteers run on treadmills until muscle fatigue set in. Most species stopped when the pain in their muscles reached moderate levels. The humans kept going. They kept going when their muscles screamed. They kept going when their lungs burned. They only stopped when their bodies physically gave out and they collapsed. And then they got back up and asked when the next test would be. The third test was canceled. The researchers had planned to test pain tolerance using controlled electric shocks. But after seeing the results of the first two tests, they realized the humans would probably endure dangerous levels of electrical current rather than quit. It was safer not to find out. Dr. Talth wrote a report for the Galactic Medical Council. The conclusion was clear and troubling. Humans were biologically unsuited for space exploration. Their pain sensitivity made them vulnerable. Any species that felt pain so intensely would be constantly distracted, constantly suffering, constantly limited by their own nervous systems. The Council read the report and made a decision. Humanity's application to join the galactic community would be denied. It was for their own good. Space was too dangerous for a species so sensitive to pain. The human ambassador received the news with quiet dignity. She thanked the Council for their consideration and returned to Earth. The Galactic Council thought that was the end of it. They were wrong. They had measured humanity's capacity to feel pain, but they had completely failed to understand what humans did with that pain, what they accomplished despite it, and what they were willing to endure when something important was at stake. They would learn. The universe would teach them, and the lesson would begin sooner than anyone expected. 6 months after the Galactic Council rejected humanity's application, everything changed. The change began with a distress signal from a mining colony on the edge of Council space. The colony was called Refuge 7. It housed 2,000 workers and their families, mostly Xanthari and Quillith, mining rare minerals from a cluster of asteroids. The colony was remote but safe, or so everyone thought. The distress signal was brief and terrifying. A massive solar flare, unprecedented in size, was heading toward the colony. The colony's shields could not handle it. They had maybe 48 hours before the radiation wave hit. Everyone in the colony would die unless they were evacuated. The Galactic Council responded immediately. They sent every available ship to Refuge 7, but there was a problem. A big problem. The nearest Council fleet was 4 days away. Even at maximum speed, they would arrive 2 days too late. The Council searched frantically for alternatives. Could any closer ships be diverted? Could the colony's shields be reinforced remotely? Could the population shelter underground in the asteroids? Every option was examined and rejected. There was simply no way to save them in time. 2,000 people were going to die, and the Council was helpless to prevent it. Then a human ship appeared at the edge of the system. It was a cargo hauler, not even a military vessel. Just a transport ship carrying supplies to a human colony in a neighboring system. The ship's captain was a woman named Rodriguez. Rodriguez heard the distress signal and immediately changed course. She contacted the Galactic Council emergency frequency. "This is the cargo ship Persistence. We are 12 hours from Refuge 7. We can reach them before the radiation wave. Requesting permission to attempt rescue." The Council coordinator who received the message was a Xanthari named Kelvin. He checked the human ship's specifications and felt his hopes die. "Persistence, your ship can carry maybe 300 people maximum. The colony has 2,000. You cannot save them all." "We can save 300, Rodriguez replied. "That's 300 who don't have to die. Beats 0. Kelvin wanted to agree, but he had to be honest. "There is another problem. To reach them in time, you will have to pass through the edge of the radiation field. Your ship's shields are not rated for that level of exposure. You and your crew will receive a lethal dose of radiation." There was a pause. Then Rodriguez spoke again, her voice calm. "How lethal?"